My boyfriend thought acting cold would make me obsessed with him. I introduced him to his replacement. Jake and I had been dating 4 months, and things started out amazing. He was sweet, texted me good morning every day, planned actual dates, seemed genuinely excited to be with me. We'd stay up talking until 3 in the morning about everything and nothing. My friends kept saying I'd found one of the good ones. Then around month 2, Jake started acting weird. He'd take hours to text back when I could see he was online. He'd cancel plans last minute, claiming he'd forgotten he had other stuff going on. When we did hang out, he'd spend half the time on his phone, act like I was bothering him if I tried to talk. I figured maybe he was stressed with work, gave him space. It just got worse. He stopped saying, "I love you" back. He'd show up late to everything without apologizing. If I cooked dinner, he'd eat it in front of the TV without a thank you. When I brought it up, he'd just shrug, say I was overthinking things. My roommate Becca said I should dump him, but I kept making excuses, remembering how good things used to be. One Friday, Jake said he was having a guys' night at his place. I wasn't invited, obviously, which was fine since I had plans with Becca anyway, but Becca got food poisoning an hour before we were supposed to go out. So I decided to drop soup off at Jake's for him and his friends. Since I'd already made a huge batch for Becca, figured it was a nice girlfriend thing to do. I got to Jake's apartment and was about to knock when I heard my name through the door. Jake was talking loud enough that I could hear everything. He was telling his friends he had me completely wrapped around his finger because he'd started treating me like crap. He actually said those words. His friend asked why he'd do that, and Jake said he'd read online that girls want what they can't have. The less attention he gave me, the more desperate I'd get to win him over. He said I'd been cooking him meals and buying him stuff ever since he started ignoring me. His friends laughed. One of them said I must be really dumb to fall for it. Jake said it wasn't about being dumb, it was psychology, or whatever girls think they can fix cold guys, and trying to fix them just makes them try harder. He said he could probably cheat on me at this point and I'd blame myself. They all thought this was hilarious. I stood there holding the stupid soup while my boyfriend explained to his friends how he was manipulating me on purpose. He said the best part was that I was so in love with him now. He could treat me however he wanted, and I'd never leave. His friend asked if he even actually liked me. Jake said I was cool enough, but the power trip was honestly better than the relationship. I left without knocking, drove home, put the soup in the fridge, called Becca and told her everything. She was pissed, even through her nausea. That's when we came up with a plan. I didn't break up with Jake. Instead, I became the girlfriend he pretended to want. I stopped texting him first. When he finally did text, I waited twice as long as he did to respond. Sometimes I just left him on read. When he asked to hang out, I'd say maybe, then confirm last minute like it didn't matter either way. I stopped cooking for him, stopped buying him things, stopped putting effort into dates. Jake noticed immediately, tried to play it cool. The less I cared, the more he started doing. He actually showed up with flowers one day. I said thanks and stuck them in water without making a big deal. He started texting more, trying to make conversation. I gave one-word answers. He asked if something was wrong. I said no. Why would anything be wrong? But here's where it got good. I started hanging out with a guy from my economics class named Ryan. Just friends, but Jake didn't need to know that. I'd mention Ryan casually how he said something funny in class, how we grabbed coffee after studying. Jake started asking all these questions about Ryan. I'd shrug, change the subject. Then I started being busy whenever Jake wanted to hang out. Sorry, already made plans with Ryan to study. Can't tonight, Ryan got tickets to this concert. Maybe another time Ryan's having people over. Jake was losing his mind trying to act like he didn't care. He started showing up at places he knew I'd be, seeing me laughing with Ryan, getting all territorial. I'd introduce them super casually, like Jake was just some guy I knew. Ryan played along perfectly. He thought the whole situation was funny. One night, Jake showed up at my apartment unannounced with takeout from my favorite place, trying to surprise me. Ryan was already there, sitting on my couch watching a movie. Jake looked between us, asked what was going on. "We're hanging out," I said. "Is that a problem?" Jake's face went red, shifted the takeout bag from one hand to the other. Ryan stood up and walked over, hand out. Jake stared at it a second before shaking, and I could tell from Ryan's slightly forced smile that Jake's grip was too tight. I kept my voice light, introduced them again slowly, like I was talking to children. Ryan said it was nice to meet him. Jake just nodded, said nothing back. The apartment suddenly felt too small with the 3 of us standing there. Jake looked at the textbooks spread across the coffee table, then at the movie paused on the TV, then back at me. I walked over, took the takeout bag from his hands, thanked him, said it smelled amazing. He asked what we were doing. I said studying for our economics exam tomorrow. Ryan added we had a huge test and really needed to focus. Jake's jaw did that twitching thing it does when he's trying not to get mad. I set the food on the counter, told Jake we really appreciated him thinking of us but had to get back to work. He asked if he could hang around and wait. Maybe, I said, but I'd text him later, didn't know how long this would take. Ryan was already back on the couch, opening his laptop, like the conversation was over. Jake stood there a few more seconds, clearly trying to figure out what to say. I walked to the door, opened it, gave him a smile that probably looked fake. He finally left. I closed the door and leaned against it a second. Ryan looked up from his laptop, asked if I was okay. I nodded, came back to the couch. He said the whole situation was pretty intense to watch. I felt bad suddenly, because Ryan was actually a nice person and I was using him to make my boyfriend jealous. He asked if I wanted to talk about it. We talked for about 20 minutes about the whole Jake thing. Ryan said he was happy to help, but wanted to make sure I wasn't losing myself in all the game playing. I told him I knew what I was doing, appreciated him looking out for me. He said as long as I was sure he'd keep playing along. We actually did study after that, since we really did have a test the next day. Over the next few days, Jake wouldn't stop texting what I was doing, who I was with, if I wanted to hang out. I kept my answers short, waited hours before responding even though I saw every message right away. He sent a long text about missing me, wanting to take me somewhere nice this weekend, mentioning that restaurant I'd talked about months ago, the one he always said was too expensive. I read the message 3 times before responding, told him I already had plans this weekend. He texted back instantly, "What plans?" "Just stuff with friends from class," I said. He asked if Ryan would be there. I said probably, along with some other people. He sent back 3 question marks. I didn't respond. The truth was, Becca and I were just planning a girls' night. Some new show and junk food. Jake didn't need to know any of that. I showed Becca the texts. She said he was completely losing it, asked how long I planned to keep this up. I said I didn't know yet. Part of me wanted to see how far he'd go. Saturday morning, I was still in pajamas making coffee when someone knocked. I checked the peephole Jake, standing there with flowers and a coffee from my favorite place. I wasn't expecting him at all, which made it easy to look unimpressed when I opened the door. He held out the flowers and coffee with this hopeful smile. I took them, said thanks. He asked if I wanted to do something today, maybe drive out to that hiking spot we'd talked about. I told him I really did have plans, and he should have asked before just showing up. He said he wanted to surprise me. I said I don't really like surprises. His face fell. He asked what my plans were. Just hanging out with Becca. Some other stuff. He stood there looking at me in my old t-shirt and pajama pants like he was trying to figure something out. I thanked him again for the flowers and coffee, started closing the door. He put his hand on it, asked if something was wrong between us. No. Why would anything be wrong? He said I seemed different lately. I told him I was just busy with school. He finally left. Becca came out of the kitchen, where she'd been watching the whole thing, trying not to laugh, biting her lip. She said she couldn't believe how desperate he looked. I put the flowers in water, sat down with the coffee he'd brought. Becca pointed out that 3 weeks ago I would have canceled everything to spend the day with him. She was right. The power dynamic had completely flipped, and it felt good but also kind of sad. We just sat there a minute not saying anything. Then she asked what my actual plan was. I said I was still figuring it out. She said I needed to decide whether I was trying to get revenge or trying to fix things, because those were two different goals. Honestly, I didn't know anymore. Monday in economics, Ryan had saved me a seat near the back. We worked on the problem sets together like always. I noticed one of Jake's friends was in this class, the guy who'd been at the apartment that night. He kept looking over at us with this weird, knowing expression. I wondered if Jake had been complaining about me to all his friends. He caught my eye once. I just stared until he looked away. Ryan asked if I knew that guy. Sort of, I said. Class ended and Ryan asked if I wanted to grab lunch. I said yes because I was actually enjoying spending time with him now, not just using him for the plan. We went to the sandwich place off campus, talked about normal stuff, his family back home, mine, what we wanted to do after graduation. I realized I'd been so focused on the Jake drama that I'd forgotten what it was like to just have an easy conversation with someone. Ryan was funny and smart and actually listened when I talked, instead of checking his phone every 5 seconds. My phone buzzed while we were eating Jake, asking where I was. I typed I was out with friends. He responded instantly, which friends? I left him on read, flipped my phone face down. Ryan noticed me smiling, asked if the plan was working. Maybe too well, I said. Explained Jake was texting constantly, showing up places, bringing gifts. Ryan got quiet a second, said he hoped I knew what I was doing. I said I thought I did, but honestly wasn't totally sure anymore. He said he was still happy to help, but I should probably figure out my endgame soon. I knew he was right, didn't want to think about it yet. We finished lunch, walked back to campus. My phone buzzed with another text from Jake asking when I'd be free later. I put my phone away without responding. That night I was doing homework when my phone started ringing instead of buzzing with a text. Jake's name on the screen, he literally never called anymore. Everything was always texts. I let it ring 3 times before answering. He sounded different right away, stressed, almost desperate. He asked if we could talk about us, really talk about where things were going. There was something in his voice that sounded almost vulnerable, and for half a second I nearly felt bad. Then I remembered him laughing with his friends about having me wrapped around his finger. I told him I was really tired, had an early class, but we could talk sometime this week. A pause. Okay, he said, quiet, actually sounding hurt. I felt this weird twist in my stomach. Could have been guilt, could have been satisfaction at finally making him feel a fraction of what he'd put me through. I said goodnight, hung up before he could say anything else. The next day, Becca came home from her shift at the campus bookstore and sat down next to me with a look on her face. She'd run into our mutual friend Sarah, who'd mentioned Jake had been complaining about me to people, telling everyone I'd changed, gone distant and cold for no reason. I felt a surge of anger, since he was actually trying to make me the bad guy when he'd started all this, by deliberately treating me like garbage. Becca said Sarah seemed kind of confused about it, since she knew Jake and I had been good together at first. I texted Sarah directly, asked exactly what Jake had said. She responded quickly, admitted Jake had made it sound like I was being cold and pulling away for no reason at all, that he'd told her he didn't know what he did wrong and I was just suddenly different. She said she'd felt bad for him until I texted. I decided right then I needed to tell a few close friends the truth about what I'd overheard at Jake's apartment, not to trash him publicly or start drama, but to protect my own reputation, since he was clearly trying to control the narrative. I texted 3 of my closest friends, asked if they wanted to grab dinner. We met at a pizza place near campus and I told them everything overhearing Jake through the door, explaining his whole manipulation strategy to his friends, deliberately treating me badly because he'd read online that girls want what they can't have, laughing about the power trip being better than the relationship. They were completely shocked. One put her hand over her mouth. Another said she'd thought Jake's hot and cold behavior seemed kind of calculated but figured she was reading too much into it. The third got genuinely angry on my behalf, couldn't believe he'd planned it all out like that. Felt really good having people validate that I wasn't crazy for being upset. They all said I should dump him immediately. I explained I was already working on something better than just breaking up. 2 days later, Jake sent a long message asking why people were acting weird around him. Sarah had been cold running into him at the library. A couple others seemed to be avoiding him. I played dumb, said I hadn't noticed anything. He pushed, asked directly if I'd been talking about him to people. I stared at that message a minute, then typed back that he'd been talking about me to people. So maybe he should worry about his own behavior first. Most direct I'd been with him since overhearing that conversation. He tried calling right after. I declined and left him on red when he texted asking what I meant. The next day Jake texted asking if we could meet for coffee to talk things out face to face. I thought about it a while. Part of me wanted to just avoid him forever, but Becca pointed out that wasn't sustainable since we shared a friend group and I'd keep running into him on campus. I was also curious what he'd actually say if given the chance. I texted back I could do coffee the next afternoon. He responded immediately with time and place. When I told Becca, she made me promise to text her every 30 minutes so she'd know I was okay. I laughed, said that seemed a little paranoid, but she insisted, said Jake had been acting increasingly desperate and she wanted to make sure he didn't do anything stupid. I promised I'd text her. Jake was already at a corner table when I got to the coffee shop the next day. He stood up when he saw me, looked nervous in a way I'd never seen before. We sat, and he immediately launched into an apology about being distant lately, said he'd been really stressed with school and work, hadn't realized how much he was neglecting the relationship, how much he cared about me, and wanted to do better. The whole time, absolutely no mention of the manipulation strategy or the conversation I'd overheard. Nothing about deliberately treating me badly or reading online advice about making girls chase him. I just nodded, waited to see if he'd tell the truth or keep lying to my face. When he finally finished his rehearsed apology, I looked right at him and asked if he'd been playing games with me on purpose. His eyes went wide, genuinely surprised by the question. He denied it immediately, said he'd never do something like that. I watched his face, could literally see him calculating whether I actually knew something or was just guessing based on his behavior. There was this visible math happening behind his eyes, and it reminded me exactly why I was done with him. This wasn't someone who cared about me. This was someone doing damage control. I didn't tell Jake what I'd overheard, wanted to see how long he'd keep lying. Instead, I said I needed space to think about whether the relationship was actually working for me anymore. His whole face changed, panicked. He asked if I was breaking up with him, reached across the table like he was going to grab my hand. I pulled back, said I didn't know yet, just needed time to figure out what I wanted. He tried to argue, convince me we could fix things. I stood up, said I had to go. I could feel him watching me walk out. Over the next week, Jake tried absolutely everything to win me back without ever admitting what he'd done. He showed up between my classes with lunch from places he knew I liked, offered to help with assignments even though he wasn't in any of my classes, sent long sweet texts like at the very beginning, back when things were good. It would almost be touching if I didn't know it was just another manipulation tactic, the nice guy approach, now that cold and distant had backfired. I kept my responses short and non-committal. Thanks for lunch. I'm good on the assignment. Appreciate the text. Ryan caught up with me after economics one day. Mentioned he'd noticed Jake watching us around campus, seemed like he was monitoring how much time we spent together and where we went. I felt uncomfortable. Hadn't meant for Ryan to get caught up in Jake's jealousy and paranoia. Ryan was a genuinely nice person who'd been helping me out, now dealing with my ex basically stalking us. I apologized. Ryan said he didn't mind helping. Then he asked again what my actual endgame was, pointed out I'd successfully made Jake desperate and miserable, but still hadn't actually broken up with him or moved on. I realized I didn't really have a clear answer. That night at home, I sat on my bed staring at my phone while Becca made popcorn in the kitchen. Ryan's question kept running through my head, because he was right, and I hated it. I'd been so focused on making Jake feel bad that I hadn't thought about what came after. Making him desperate and confused felt good in the moment, but it wasn't actually fixing anything inside me. The hurt was still there, under all the anger and strategy. Becca came in with popcorn, sat down, asked if I was actually going to break up with Jake or just keep him hanging forever. I picked at the blanket, admitted I was scared ending things would feel like letting him win, like he'd successfully messed with my head and just walked away without consequences. Becca set down the popcorn, looked at me seriously, said staying with someone who treated me like a science project wasn't winning either. I knew she was right, but it still felt wrong to just let him go after everything he'd done. In economics 2 days later, Jake's friend came over to my desk after the lecture, one of the guys who'd been laughing that night at Jake's apartment. My whole body tensed, but he looked uncomfortable, nervous. Said he wanted to apologize for laughing during that conversation. I just stared and waited. He explained he'd thought it was just normal guy talk. Hadn't realized Jake was actually seriously messing with my head on purpose. He shifted his backpack. Admitted Jake had been spiraling lately, obsessed with losing me, asking all his friends for advice. I asked what advice they were giving. Mostly telling him to just be honest and stop playing games, but Jake seemed convinced he could win me back with the right strategy. The irony wasn't lost on me. I thanked him for the apology, left before he could say anything else. That weekend, there was a party at someone's off-campus house, and Ryan invited me along with a group from class. I almost said no, tired of the whole social scene, but Becca convinced me I needed to get out. We got there around 10. The place was already packed. I was talking to some girls from history class when I saw Jake push through the crowd, looking drunk and angry, heading straight for me. Before I could move, he was right in front of me, demanding to know if I was hooking up with Ryan. His voice was loud enough that people nearby stopped talking to watch. I kept my voice calm, told him he was embarrassing himself. He grabbed my arm, asked again where Ryan was. A couple guys from the study group stepped between us, told Jake to back off. Ryan appeared from somewhere, put his hand on my back, asked if I was okay. Jake tried pushing past to get to him, but more people got involved, started pulling him toward the door. Someone said they were calling him an Uber. Ryan asked if I wanted to leave. I nodded. We walked back to my apartment, and I felt shaky the whole way. I'd never seen Jake that aggressive before. Ryan walked me all the way to my door, asked again if I was okay. I said I was fine. I wasn't really. I woke up the next morning to a long text from Jake, apologizing for his behavior at the party, blaming it on drinking too much and stress about school, saying he knew he'd messed up, begging for another chance, that he'd do anything to prove he was serious, that he loved me and couldn't lose me. Several paragraphs, and I read the whole thing twice. Same cycle as before, bad behavior followed by apologies that sounded good but never led to actual change. I didn't respond right away, got in the shower, tried to think about what I actually wanted. By the time I got out, I still hadn't figured out what to say. That afternoon, I called my older sister, needing to talk to someone outside the whole situation. She lived 3 states away, had only met Jake once over video chat. I told her everything, starting with overhearing the conversation at his apartment. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, asked a simple question. Did I even want to be with Jake anymore? Or was I just staying in this because I was angry? The question hit hard because I'd been avoiding thinking about it directly. I tried to remember the last time I'd felt actually happy in this relationship and couldn't. Even before I knew about the manipulation, I'd been stressed and confused by his hot and cold behavior. My sister said I didn't have to have all the answers right now, but should think about what I wanted instead of just reacting to Jake. After we hung up, I felt more confused, but also somehow clearer. That evening, Becca made dinner and we ate on the couch watching some cooking show neither of us cared about. She said she'd noticed I'd been spending way more time with Ryan than with Jake lately, not just as part of the plan anymore, but actually choosing to hang out with him. I'd been looking forward to seeing him, laughing at his jokes, telling him about my day. She asked if maybe I was developing real feelings for him. I put down my fork, said I didn't know. Everything was too complicated right now. But even saying it, I knew she was right. Time with Ryan felt easy and fun in a way time with Jake never had even at the start. When things were supposedly good, there'd always been this edge of anxiety about whether I was doing enough. With Ryan, I just felt like myself. Ryan and I met at the library 3 days later to study for midterms. We found a table in the back corner, spread out notes and textbooks, worked a couple hours trading practice questions. During a break, he closed his laptop, said he needed to tell me something. My stomach tightened, could tell from his face it was serious. He said he liked me as more than a friend, knew the timing was terrible with everything going on with Jake, but wanted to be honest, didn't expect anything from me. We could keep being just friends if that's what I needed. I appreciated his directness. Told him I needed to sort out my current relationship before thinking about anything else. He said he understood, and we went back to studying, but the energy between us had shifted into something I couldn't quite name. I spent the next 2 days thinking about everything Jake and the manipulation, the person I'd become trying to get revenge, Ryan, and how different things felt with him, what my sister had asked. I realized I was done. Not because of Ryan, but because I deserved better than someone who treated relationships as power games. I texted Jake, asked him to meet me at the campus coffee shop the next afternoon. He responded within seconds, asking if everything was okay. I just typed that we needed to talk. He sent 3 more messages about what? Did he do something wrong? Could we talk now instead? I didn't answer any of them. The next morning before I was supposed to meet him, Becca called me into her room. Laptop open, looking upset. She turned the screen toward me, and I felt sick. She'd been screenshotting Jake's social media posts and comments over the past month, every single one subtly trash-talking me while playing the victim. Posts about how hard it was when your girlfriend changed for no reason. Comments on friends' posts about girls who play mind games. A whole thread about how he'd been nothing but good to me and I was treating him like garbage. Becca said she'd started documenting it a few weeks earlier, just in case things got worse. Figured I should have evidence of how manipulative he'd been. I scrolled through, hands shaking. He'd built this whole online narrative where I was the bad guy and he was the poor, confused boyfriend. I thanked Becca, told her I was definitely breaking up with him today. She hugged me, said I was making the right choice. I grabbed my jacket and headed out with all those screenshots burned into my mind. Jake was already at a corner table, looking at his phone, tapping his foot against the chair leg. He looked up when I sat down, tried to smile, came out nervous and fake. I didn't smile back, just put my bag on the empty chair and looked at him directly. He started talking immediately. Glad I wanted to meet. How he'd been thinking about us a lot. I let him go maybe 30 seconds before cutting him off, told him I knew about his manipulation strategy because I'd overheard him bragging to his friends that night at his apartment. His face went completely white. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out at first. Then excuses, it wasn't like that. I was misunderstanding. His friends were just joking around and he'd gone along with it. Didn't actually mean any of it. I cut him off again, said I didn't want more lies, that I'd heard every word about treating me like crap on purpose, about the power trip being better than the relationship. He looked down at the table, hands shaking, tried reaching across to touch mine. I pulled back. He said he was sorry, didn't know why he'd said those things, had been stressed and stupid. I just stared until he stopped talking. Then his face changed, got angry instead of apologetic. Said I'd been playing games too, using Ryan to make him jealous. His voice got louder. People at other tables started looking over. He said I was acting so innocent, but I'd manipulated him just as much with the Ryan stuff. I admitted that was true, wasn't proud of it, but pointed out I'd only started once I found out he'd been manipulating me for months. He actually argued that what I did was worse because I did it on purpose. I almost laughed at how completely he missed the irony. He said at least he hadn't paraded some other girl around to hurt me. I reminded him he'd literally told his friends he could cheat on me and I'd blame myself. He went quiet again, jaw clenching. A woman at the next table was definitely listening now. Jake noticed too, lowered his voice, asked what I wanted from him. What would make this right? I said nothing would, because I couldn't trust anything he said anymore. Told him we were done, that I didn't want him contacting me except for necessary stuff, like getting his things from my apartment. He looked genuinely shocked, like he hadn't actually expected me to break up with him, eyes going watery, asking if I was serious. I said yes, completely. He said he loved me, would do anything to fix this. I told him if he loved me, he wouldn't have treated our relationship like a psychology experiment. He put his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. Part of me felt bad watching him fall apart. Another part wondered if this was just another manipulation. I was too exhausted to care which. I stood up, grabbed my bag. He looked up, asked if we could at least talk more later. No, I said. Nothing left to talk about. I walked away, didn't look back, even though I heard him call my name once. Outside the coffee shop, I took a deep breath and felt this weight lift off my chest. It was over, and I'd actually done it. The next few days felt strange and uncomfortable. Jake and I had so many mutual friends, overlapping social spaces constantly. I saw him in the dining hall Tuesday, looking terrible, like he hadn't slept. His friends went quiet when I walked past their table. Wednesday, I ran into him outside the library. We just nodded without speaking. So awkward. Thursday, one of his friends stopped me after class, said Jake was really struggling with the breakup. I didn't know what to say, felt guilty even though I knew I'd made the right choice. That night I told Becca about feeling bad, and she got frustrated with me. Reminded me his feelings weren't my responsibility, especially after everything he'd done. Said I needed to stop making excuses for him even now. She was right, but still hard to see him looking so miserable around campus. Our mutual friends were being weird too, unsure whose side to take. Some asked what happened. I just said we broke up and left it there. Ryan texted Friday, asking if I wanted coffee, and I said yes. We met at the same place I'd broken up with Jake, which felt weird, but I didn't mention it. He asked if I was okay after the breakup. I was honest, told him I felt relieved more than sad. He looked surprised, asked if I was sure. I explained the relationship had been making me miserable for weeks, and ending it felt like finally putting down something heavy I'd been carrying. He said he understood, was glad I was doing what was right for me. We talked about staying friends while I took time to process and figure out what I actually wanted. He said that sounded good, he wasn't going anywhere. His understanding made me like him even more, but I was determined not to jump into another relationship right away, needed time to just be myself without worrying about what some guy thought of me. We finished coffee, walked back to campus. Felt easy and comfortable in a way things with Jake never did. On Saturday, Jake's friend from that apartment conversation, the one who'd already apologized, messaged me on Instagram, wanting to apologize again, said Jake had been telling everyone how much he'd messed up, had admitted to his friends he'd followed some toxic online advice about making girls chase him, and now realized it had backfired completely. Said Jake kept saying he wished he could go back and do it all differently. I appreciated the apology but told him I needed space from anyone connected to Jake right now. He said he understood, was sorry for his own part in it. Felt a little better knowing Jake was at least being honest with his friends now, but it didn't change anything for me. The damage was done, and I had zero interest in giving him another chance to mess with my head. I started focusing more on classes, spending time with friends who weren't part of the Jake drama. Felt good to remember who I was before that relationship swallowed so much of my energy. Becca and I had movie nights 3 times that week, no Jake talk at all, just dumb comedies and too much popcorn, exactly what I needed. I also joined a study group for my hardest class, the one I'd been struggling with because relationship stuff had been so distracting. The group met twice a week, everyone nice and focused. One girl, Sarah, asked if I wanted to get lunch sometime, and I realized I'd been so wrapped up in Jake and Ryan I hadn't made any new friends in months. I said yes. Slowly, I was rebuilding parts of my life I'd let fall apart. 3 weeks after the breakup, I ran into Jake at a campus event for one of the clubs we were both in. Thought about skipping it to avoid him, but Becca said I shouldn't let him stop me from doing things I wanted. So I went, and of course, he was there. We ended up in the same conversation group during an activity. Had to interact brief, civil, awkward. Afterward, he asked if we could talk for a minute. I almost said no, decided to just get it over with. We walked outside, stood by the entrance. He apologized again, this time genuinely, instead of trying to manipulate me into taking him back. He admitted he'd treated the relationship like a game and hurt me because of it. Said he'd been seeing the counselor at the health center, working on his issues. I told him I appreciated the apology, but it didn't mean we were getting back together or becoming friends. He said he understood, just wanted me to know he was sorry. We said goodbye, went back inside separately. It felt like actual closure, not another manipulation attempt. Ryan and I kept spending time together, and I started noticing how different everything felt compared to Jake. Ryan was consistent, honest, never played hot and cold, never made me guess how he felt. If he said he'd text later, he actually did. If we made plans, he showed up on time. He asked about my life and actually listened to the answers instead of waiting for his turn to talk. I wasn't ready to date him yet, but felt grateful knowing what healthy attention looked like after months of manipulation and mind games. We studied together, got meals together, went to campus events together. Easy and comfortable, no anxiety about what he was thinking or whether he actually liked me. One night, walking back from the library, he made a joke that had me laughing so hard I nearly dropped my books. I realized I couldn't remember the last time Jake had made me laugh like that. Becca pulled me aside after one of our movie nights, said she was proud of how I'd handled everything, stood up for myself without completely losing my cool or doing anything I'd regret. Pointed out that a few months earlier I'd been making excuses for Jake's behavior, and now I was setting clear boundaries and putting my own well-being first. I thanked her for being there through all of it, for calling me out when I needed it. She said that's what best friends do. We hugged, and I felt this wave of gratitude for having someone in my life who genuinely cared and wasn't playing games. Felt good recognizing my own growth, seeing how far I'd come from that night standing outside Jake's apartment holding soup, listening to him brag about manipulating me. I wasn't the same person anymore, and I was proud of that. I scheduled an appointment at the campus health center the following week, filled out forms in the waiting room about my relationship history and current concerns. The counselor, a woman in her 40s, asked me to explain what brought me in, so I told her about Jake and the manipulation and how I'd handled it. She listened without judging, then asked why I thought I'd stayed with him even after his behavior changed so drastically. I didn't have a good answer at first, just that I kept hoping things would go back to how they'd been at the start. She asked about my past relationships, my family, and we started connecting dots I hadn't noticed before. My dad used to give me and my mom the silent treatment when he was upset, sometimes for days, and I'd learned to try harder to make him happy instead of addressing the actual problem. The counselor pointed out Jake's hot and cold behavior probably felt familiar in a weird way, like something I already knew how to navigate even though it hurt. We talked about how people repeat childhood patterns in adult relationships without realizing it. Uncomfortable, sitting there recognizing how much of my reaction to Jake came from old wounds I hadn't dealt with. She gave me homework journal about times I'd accepted bad treatment in other relationships and what I got out of staying. I left feeling kind of raw and exposed, but also like I was finally understanding something important about myself. Over the next few weeks, I kept going back, working through a lot about my need for approval and my fear of conflict. She helped me see that walking away from Jake wasn't giving up, it was choosing myself, something I'd never really learned to do. About a month after the breakup, I got a notification that Jake had sent a friend request on social media. I'd unfriended him after everything went down, but hadn't blocked him, not wanting to seem like I cared that much. Seeing his name pop up made my stomach twist. I stared at the request a while, trying to figure out what he wanted, whether to accept. Part of me was curious what he was doing, whether he was dating someone new. Another part knew staying connected would just give him a way back into my life, even just through screens. I brought it up in my next session. My counselor asked what I'd hoped to gain by accepting versus what I might lose. I admitted I was mostly curious. Maybe wanted to show him I was fine without him. She asked if I trusted his reasons for reaching out. I realized I didn't. Jake never did anything without some kind of strategy behind it, and reconnecting online was probably just another way to test whether he still had any power over me. I said I wanted to keep the boundary firm, since I'd worked too hard to get here. She said that was a healthy choice, reminded me curiosity wasn't worth sacrificing my peace of mind. I declined the request, felt this weird mix of relief and sadness, like closing a door I'd been holding open just in case. Ryan texted a few days later, asking if I wanted to go to a concert with him and some friends from his dorm. He made clear it was a group thing, not a date, which I appreciated. I said yes, met up with everyone outside the venue Friday night. 5 of us total, everyone friendly, excited about the band. We pushed toward the front, spent the next 2 hours dancing and singing along to songs I barely knew. Hadn't been to a concert in months, since Jake always said they were too crowded and loud, which should have been a red flag, given I'd mentioned loving live music on our very first date. Being there with Ryan and his friends reminded me how much I'd given up trying to make Jake happy. Nobody was monitoring my behavior or making me feel like I was too much or too loud. I could just exist and have fun without worrying about someone's mood shifting because I was enjoying myself too much. During one of the slower songs, Ryan grabbed my hand, pulled me closer so we wouldn't get separated in the crowd. His hand stayed in mine even after we cleared the crush of people felt easy and natural, not calculated. On the walk back to campus, we talked about the show, our favorite songs, and he kept holding my hand the whole way. Not dramatic, not charged with tension, just comfortable, like something that made sense. The next afternoon, Ryan and I grabbed coffee, and I told him I'd had a really good time at the concert. He said he was glad, then got quiet a second before saying he wanted to be honest about something. I braced for bad news, but he just said he appreciated our friendship and liked spending time with me, but understood I wasn't ready to officially date anyone yet. I felt a wave of gratitude, because he was saying exactly what I needed to hear without me having to explain anything. I told him he was right, but I was still working through stuff from my last relationship and didn't want to jump into something new before I was ready. He said he understood completely, was happy to keep hanging out casually while I figured things out, didn't pressure me, didn't act like he was just waiting around for me to change my mind. His lack of pressure made me feel safer than I had in any romantic situation in a long time. With Jake, everything had felt like a test, like I was constantly being evaluated on whether I was worth his time. With Ryan, I could just be myself, no strategy, no performance. We finished our coffee, walked around campus a while, talked about classes and families and what we wanted after graduation. Good, easy conversations, no worrying about hidden meanings. In my study group the following week, one of the girls asked about my relationship status during a break from cramming for biology. I opened my mouth to mention Jake and realized I didn't automatically think of him anymore when that question came up. Caught me off guard for months, he'd been the first thing on my mind whenever relationships came up. I told her I was single and focusing on myself right now, and saying it out loud felt true, not like something I was performing to sound healthy and independent. She nodded, said that was cool, moved on to her own dating life. I sat there kind of amazed. I'd reached this point without even noticing the healing had been happening slowly in the background while I was busy going to therapy, hanging out with friends, rebuilding the parts of my life I'd neglected. I wasn't obsessing over what Jake was doing, whether he missed me, checking his social media, or asking mutual friends about him. He'd become someone I used to know instead of this huge presence taking up all my mental space. Jake graduated at the end of the semester, and one of his friends mentioned he was moving back to his hometown for a job. Knowing he wouldn't be on campus anymore felt like closing a chapter, and I was relieved I wouldn't have to worry about running into him at parties anymore. His friend pulled me aside after a group study session, said Jake had told him he'd learned a lot from how badly he'd messed up our relationship. I didn't know what to say, just nodded. Said I hoped he figured things out. Part of me wanted to be bitter, say he didn't deserve to grow from hurting me, but mostly I just felt neutral about the whole thing. He was leaving, I was staying, our lives moving in different directions. That felt like enough closure without needing a big final conversation or dramatic goodbye. Winter break gave me space away from campus and everything that had happened. I went home, spent time with family and old high school friends who knew nothing about the Jake situation. My mom commented on how relaxed I seemed compared to Thanksgiving, when I'd been stressed and distracted. My sister said I was finally acting like myself again, instead of the worried version she'd met over fall break. We stayed up late watching movies and talking, and she told me she'd been concerned about me during those months but hadn't wanted to overstep. I admitted I'd been in a bad relationship and had a lot to work through to get out of it. She hugged me, said she was proud of how I'd handled everything, how much stronger I seemed now. Being home with people who'd known me before Jake reminded me who I was outside of that relationship. I'd spent so much energy trying to win him over and then getting revenge that I'd almost forgotten I had an identity separate from all that drama. When spring semester started, Ryan and I met for coffee the first week back, caught up on our breaks, talked about new classes. Then he brought up the conversation we'd had before winter break, asked if I'd thought any more about what I wanted with us. I told him I'd been working through a lot of my trust issues in therapy over break, and I felt ready to try dating him, if he was still interested. He smiled, said he'd been waiting for me to be ready, which made me feel both grateful and a little guilty he'd been so patient. We agreed to take things slow, communicate honestly about everything instead of playing games or making assumptions. He said he wanted to know if something bothered me instead of me just pulling away or acting cold. I promised I'd be direct with him, asked him to do the same. Felt good starting something with clear expectations and honest communication, instead of all the manipulation and mind games from before. Our first real date was completely different from anything with Jake. Ryan planned an afternoon at an art museum I'd mentioned wanting to visit months earlier, which meant he'd actually been listening when I talked instead of just waiting for his turn. We walked through the exhibits, and he asked which pieces I liked and why, genuinely interested in my answers. Not on his phone, not distracted, not acting like spending time with me was some kind of favor. Over lunch afterward, he told me about his family and his plans after graduation, asked about mine. Conversation flowed easily, no awkward silences, no power dynamics. I kept catching myself waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to suddenly turn cold or distant or start playing games, but he stayed consistently kind and present the whole time. On the walk back to campus, he held my hand again. Felt natural like it had at the concert. I realized I wasn't performing or strategizing or trying to figure out his hidden agenda. I was just enjoying spending time with someone who actually seemed to like me for who I was. Becca pulled me aside after one of our movie nights, said she wanted to tell me something. I got nervous, thought she'd say she was worried about me rushing into things with Ryan, but instead she said she could tell I was genuinely happy, instead of just performing happy like I sometimes did with Jake. Said I seemed lighter, more like myself, laughing easily instead of constantly analyzing every interaction for hidden meanings. I asked if she approved of Ryan. She said absolutely, that he seemed like a good person who treated me well and made me smile without any games. She pointed out that a few months earlier I'd been making excuses for terrible behavior, and now I was in a relationship where I didn't have to defend or justify anything. I thanked her again for being there through it all. She hugged me, said that's what best friends do, and I felt this deep gratitude for having someone who genuinely cared about my well-being without any agenda. Felt refreshing to just enjoy someone's company without strategy or defense mechanisms, both with Ryan and with Becca. I wasn't constantly on guard waiting for people to hurt me or use me. I could just exist, be myself, and trust the people around me actually liked that person. A few months into dating Ryan, I got a message from Jake I wasn't expecting. Popped up on my phone while I was studying in the library, and seeing his name after all this time made my stomach flip for a second. Long message, he'd been going to therapy since we broke up, working on his issues with wanting to control people and treating relationships like some kind of game he had to win. Wrote that he wasn't asking me to respond or trying to get back together, just wanted me to know he understood how badly he'd messed up and took full responsibility for hurting me on purpose. I read it twice, sitting there with my economics textbook open, and realized I didn't feel angry or sad or much of anything. I appreciated that he was working on himself and actually acknowledging what he'd done instead of making excuses, but had zero interest in reopening that door or continuing any kind of conversation with him. I closed the message without responding, went back to studying, and it felt good recognizing that his apology was for his own benefit, not something I needed to participate in. Spring break came around, and Ryan asked if he could come home with me to meet my family. I was nervous since my sister knew everything about the Jake situation and I wasn't sure how she'd react to me bringing someone new around so soon. But Ryan met my parents at dinner the first night, and they loved him immediately, asking about his major, his family, his plans after graduation. He answered everything thoughtfully, asked them questions back, genuinely interested in getting to know them, instead of just trying to impress them. My sister pulled me into the kitchen while we cleaned up, said she could see how different this was from when I'd talk about Jake, how relaxed and happy I seemed instead of stressed and anxious all the time. Later that week, my mom caught me alone in the living room, sat down next to me, said she remembered how worried she'd been when I was with Jake, even though I'd tried to hide it, because I always seemed to be walking on eggshells, second-guessing myself. With Ryan, she said, I seemed more like myself, laughing easily, not constantly analyzing everything. Meant a lot hearing that the people who knew me best could see how much healthier things were now. Back at school after break, I had a therapy session where I realized I hadn't thought about the whole manipulation and revenge thing in weeks. I'd been so focused on my relationship with Ryan, classes, and friends that the Jake drama just wasn't taking up space in my head anymore. My therapist pointed out that was actually a really good sign of healing, when you stop defining yourself by the bad thing that happened and start building new positive experiences instead. She said a lot of people get stuck replaying the trauma or the revenge, but I'd managed to move forward and create something good without letting the past control my present. It clicked for me in that moment all the time I'd spent being angry at Jake and planning ways to make him feel bad had actually been keeping me connected to him in a weird way. Now that I'd let go of that and focused on Ryan and my own life, I felt lighter and more free than I had in a long time. One night, Becca and I were hanging out, eating pizza and watching bad reality TV like we used to before all the drama started. She asked if I ever regretted how I'd handled things with Jake, using Ryan to make him jealous, playing the same games he'd played with me. I admitted I was glad I'd stood up for myself instead of just letting him keep treating me badly, even though my methods probably weren't the healthiest way to deal with it. Becca said what mattered was that I'd learned from the whole situation and hadn't let Jake's behavior make me think I deserved to be treated like that in future relationships. She pointed out a lot of people would have just blamed themselves or made excuses, but I'd recognized the manipulation and refused to accept it. We grabbed a couple of drinks from the fridge and toasted to growth and better choices, and I felt this deep appreciation for having a friend who'd supported me through everything without judging how I'd handled it. Things with Ryan were going really well until we had our first real fight, over something stupid. He wanted to go to his friend's party on a night I'd already made plans for us to have dinner with some classmates, and we both got frustrated trying to sort out the schedule. My immediate reaction was this wave of anxiety that he was going to turn cold and distant as punishment for disagreeing, exactly like Jake used to do. I could feel myself starting to shut down, pull away, already bracing for him to ice me out for days. But instead, Ryan just said we should talk it through and figure out a compromise. We ended up going to dinner with my friends and then to his friend's party after, and the whole thing was resolved in about 10 minutes. Afterward, I told him about my fear that any conflict would turn into manipulation or emotional punishment, and he looked genuinely sad. I'd been conditioned to expect that. He promised me disagreements were normal, that healthy people work through them together instead of using them as weapons. Such a small thing, but it showed me what a real relationship was supposed to look like. As the semester wound down and finals approached, I found myself looking back on the past year, barely recognizing the person who used to make excuses for Jake's terrible behavior. I'd learned to trust my gut when something felt wrong, to set clear boundaries about how I wanted to be treated, to spot manipulation before it could really take hold. More importantly, I'd learned what genuine care and respect actually looked like through being with Ryan. Not grand gestures or intense passion, burning hot and cold consistency and honesty, treating each other like actual partners instead of opponents in some power struggle. I aced my economics final, the same class where I'd first started hanging out with Ryan, and it felt like closing one chapter and opening another. Jake's friend from that class, the one who'd apologized for laughing during that awful conversation, stopped me after our last class of the semester. I mentioned Jake was dating someone new and apparently treating treating her really well, like he'd actually learned something from how badly he'd screwed up with me. I waited for the bitter feeling to hit, the anger at having been the lesson he learned from, but instead just felt genuinely glad he was growing, not repeating the same patterns with someone else. Later in therapy, I told my counselor about it, and she said that perspective, feeling good about his growth without resentment, showed how much I'd healed and moved forward. Pointed out that a few months earlier I would have been angry or hurt, but now I could separate his journey from mine and recognize we were both better off apart. Ryan and I were walking back from the library one night, talking about summer plans and next semester's classes, when he stopped and turned to face me, said he was falling in love with me, and wanted me to know, even though it hadn't been that long and he didn't want to pressure me. Instead of feeling scared or skeptical like I might have before, I realized I felt exactly the same way about him. I told him I loved him too, and it felt earned and real, not like the rushed, intense feelings I'd had with Jake that were more about drama than actual connection. We were building something based on honesty and mutual respect, not games and power dynamics, and that made all the difference. He kissed me right there on the path, and I felt completely sure about us in a way I never had with anyone before. A few days later, Becca came running into our apartment screaming that she'd been accepted into an amazing summer program abroad she'd applied for months ago. I was genuinely excited for her, jumping up and down, hugging her while she showed me the acceptance email. She'd been there through everything with Jake, supporting me, calling me out when I needed it, helping me see I deserved better. She joked she could leave for the summer knowing I was in good hands with Ryan and wouldn't fall for any more manipulation from random guys. We both laughed, but I knew she was right. I'd learned way too much to ever go backward into that kind of toxic situation again. The experience had taught me what to look for and what to avoid, and I was grateful for that, even though it had sucked living through it. A full year after breaking up with Jake, I looked around at my life and could barely believe how much had changed. I was doing well in all my classes, actually enjoying school instead of being distracted by relationship drama constantly. Ryan and I had been together for months, and it just kept getting better, built on trust and communication instead of manipulation and games. Most importantly, I developed a strong sense of my own worth that didn't depend on anyone else's validation. I knew what I deserved in a relationship, and I wasn't willing to settle for less anymore. The whole experience with Jake had taught me that sometimes the best revenge isn't some elaborate plan to make someone feel bad, it's just living well and refusing to let their toxicity define your story. I was happy and healthy and surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, and that felt like the best possible outcome. And that's the full story. I love finding the little lessons in moments like this. If it helped you see something differently, that's a win.